Hey, here we are with Bahara. She works with Royal Wellness and Land Together. She's also a teacher at a few different prisons, I think. Folsom and Mule Creek. We met through the Inside Garden program, which is now called Land Together. And my name is Jesse Ayers, the host of Echoes of Society, formerly incarcerated. And here we talk about personal impact and truth and our experience and our journey through the incarceration and post incarceration for those of us who have come home. There's a lot of people who are participants that are still in the system, and I'd like to shed light on her work and her personal journey in and out of the system as she goes on sometimes a daily basis. How you doing, Bahara? Nice to have you on here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. It's good to see you.
It's good to
You
see you too, Jesse.
fresh from your trip to Italy.
Oh yeah, yeah. I took a little vacay.
How is that? Like, you spend so much time incarcerated and then boom, you get to hop on a plane and fly to a totally different side of not even the country, the world. I mean, and see what that's like.
It was cool. It was like I don't know. I really enjoyed it, and I also recognized how much I love my work because I was happy to come back and get back to work, but I also embraced my vacation, which is really important as a therapist to self-care and do travel and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You,
it was
wh-
great.
when you talk to guys who are incarcerated, they talk to you about their personal experience, like the shoe or, being in the hole for a long time or certain cells in certain prisons that are smaller than others. And you get onto an airplane or use the bathroom. Do you think about that and go, if they made it, I can get through this?
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. Because I know it's just such a tight fit, and flying on a plane for 4 hours and then 9 hours, straight, it can feel like a lot, and it's just very confining to stay stuck in your seat and having like small areas to walk around. And I often find myself, like you said, thinking about like I know people who have experienced things on a much more intense, confining level. So I definitely humble myself a lot in these experiences. Or even like to speak to what you're saying too, like it was funny because my hotel room was crazy small and I wasn't
Mm.
expecting it. And I was just like, but we were like fine with it. We were like, it's fine. It's not even a big deal. We didn't need the space very much. It was just to sleep. But I remember thinking like, this ain't nothing compared to like the stories I've heard on Inside, right? Like where like this is still bigger than the cells at Folsom, and it's like five of the cells at Folsom, at minimum, right? Like so I just always go back to like the work that I do and how it relates to whatever I'm doing in the present moment. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but definitely keeps me aware.
Yeah, it's for lack of a better term, it is what it is, and so many times, especially since I've been out almost 4 years now. I'll talk about a personal experience and whether I'm being open with somebody or whatever, and they'll say, "Well, just be glad you're not in this situation," and they'll paint a picture of something worse, and I'm like, "Why do I always have to think of something worse, to make me feel better?" Like just it being what it is. Like somebody can give me the comparison without having to put the other thing down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really important to do that, Jesse, actually, because it's like you shouldn't want, all right, as in a therapeutic stance, it's like you don't want to minimize the current experience you're having by sugarcoating it with like it could be worse. Sometimes it helps us get out of serious funks, sure, but it's also like not to be used as a crutch every time. Sometimes it's important, like you said, to be in whatever it is and be like, this sucks, or whatever the situation is, even if it's like a first world problem, still is really important to acknowledge how what's coming up for you in those moments.
Yeah. I think I forgot to mention that. Out of the many hats that you wear, I forgot to say you're a licensed clinical therapist, right?
Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah. But there was a picture as you were talking. I was thinking about a photo that I saw on a story. I think you were on a trip with Land Together. You and Jamala were in New Orleans, and there was a gardening section, and they had created a space that was equal to, I think, the segregated cells in Angola, and it was a very, very tiny space, right?
Yeah. So that company is called Solitary Gardens, and
Hmm.
what they do, it's founded by Jackie, and Jackie, what she does is her and her team will correspond with people who are currently in solitary confinement. And they correspond to build a garden on the outside. So if you go into like New Orleans where we were, there's like this garden area that has a bunch of small like solitary confinement size spaces. So each garden is the size of a cell, a solitary confinement cell. And each garden belongs to somebody who's currently serving time in solitary confinement. And she corresponds with them and asks them, like, what do you want in your garden? How do you want to build the foundation? And people on the outside here tend to those gardens. They correspond with them, help them build the garden, and then pictures get sent back and forth of like the progress. And something cool for Jamala was he was somebody who spent time in solitary confinement historically. And he, while
Yeah,
we were there, was allowed to add to a solitary garden of his choice and like got to put some plants in there. And it was dedicated to him, like that space. So,
dang.
yeah.
It makes me think of being a kid. Like I say, a kid, but I was probably 14 or 15 years old. The two times that I was in juvenile hall, and I remember being in solitary confinement at that time. And things have changed now. I think in 93, 94, the way they treated us in the juvenile center was different. If you're a problem, they just put you in segregation, and then if you're a problem with your cellie, they single cell you, and they had the windows spray painted on the outside.
Uh-huh.
And at some point, whenever they had created that, is like the maximum security wing. But I don't know if it was just wind and dust and dirt and sand, had kind of worn the paint out in certain little sections so you could see through a teeny little crack, and you could see out into, there was a baseball complex, probably a quarter mile away. And then you could see out to like a dirt, like it's supposed to be grass, but it's mostly dirt and dead stuff. And that was your space. You know what I mean? Like when you're looking out your window, counting the days down, watching the sun, the shadows from the sun wherever it was on the cinder block, and it just kind of gave me an idea of those guys who were in solitary, getting a photograph with a garden, and then like you said, progress. Because looking out those windows, if you have a window, it's very unlikely that there's going to be any progress. It's probably going to be some kind of weeds. The sun, probably dried up whatever was alive there, and you're looking at just a bunch of dirt. So, and that's awesome. That somebody put that thought in to creating that for somebody else. I didn't know that, but I'm amazed at the heart that goes into that. It's very thoughtful.
Hmm. Yeah, it was cool.
Hmm. Aside from Louisiana and California, have you been to any other states and visited any other prison systems?
Hmm. Ponder. I don't think so. I don't think I have.
Hmm. How many prisons in California have you been through?
Let's see. Well, where do I start? So I've been into a handful. So San Quentin,
Hmm.
Solano, California Medical Facility, CHCF, which is in Stockton,
Yep.
Folsom Prison, Folsom Women's when it still existed,
Oh yeah.
California Institute for Women, which is down in Chino,
Hmm.
CCWF in Fresno, Avenal State Prison, Lancaster State Prison. I feel like I'm forgetting some, but I've made my route,
Yeah,
from the
yeah, yeah,
top to the bottom, and I know there's plenty more that I haven't been in. But I've had my fair share of being in a facility for sure.
yeah. What's the commute like when you go to work from where you live to the you work in both Folsom and Mule Creek, right?
Yeah. So Folsom, it's a quick commute. It's just everything's like right off the freeway. Folsom's one of those prisons that's not really out in the wild, if you will, right? Like it's like,
Mm.
a lot of prisons are kind of like, especially in California, it's like they're out in the cuts where they're kind of like off in a rural town. And Folsom's actually in Folsom, California, and there's a whole town amongst it, and it's just this historic prison that sits amongst like a community.
Yeah.
And so it's a quick shot like off the freeway to get to it. But Mule Creek, and on other hands, it's almost time and a half the drive to get to Folsom. So you're driving out in the cuts into the middle of nowhere into Ione, California. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's just off of a quiet road and there's really nothing around it. It's not far from Preston, which is an old boys' school from
Yeah.
and correctional facility from back in the day for youth. You could see Preston in the distance.
The
You're at the
castle.
hmm
Yeah, I was there in '95, and I paroled in '97, and then I went back later. They have a fire camp program for what they call adults, like if you're 18 to 25. I had gone back on a violation and went through the Ponderosa pre-camp there, and then I ended up going to a fire camp up in Nevada City, which is uh, well, Nevada County, up there by Grass Valley. So yeah, I mean Preston, it was an experience. I think they still use that little castle for like some kind of museum tours or ghost tours or something.
Yeah, they have special events. So Halloween they do like the little haunted house, and then they have like a social event a few times a year where you can come like hang out around the castle and eat and drink and stuff. Like they have little like social events. So you could become a member where you pay to like get invited to these events or something like that. So they
Yeah,
made it like a social thing for sure.
yeah. I remember that being a real small, tight knit community. The population was only maybe 1,500 or something. Back then anyway. It's probably built up since more. But in the fire camp, we would go out and we would do community projects like the trees that we would cut down. We'd end up wood chipping them and then go to like a park and like spread the wood chips around, stuff like that. Sandbag for the times when it was going to flood, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I was going to say Folsom. That must have built up because I remember going through there on the bus years ago, and I remember I can't remember what highway it was coming off of Sacramento, but when you kind of get to that area, like you said, all around there is houses,
Uh-huh.
and anyway, it's like the entrance to Folsom is in the movie 48 Hours. When he first gets out, uh, and then I think in the movie American Me, I think they use that same. So anyway, Johnny Cash is one of the most famous prisons as far as name goes. And then historically, I think that was the first death row. They used to hang people at Folsom when it was first originally built. And then I think they have tours there too. You could see the weapons room and stuff like that. Do you get any of those like vibes or feelings when you go there, or do the inmates feel, or the incarcerated people? Do they feel some type of like nostalgic sense of like, hey, we're at Folsom? Like it's different than being at any other just regular old prison out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, so the hanging room is still there.
Dang.
It's in tier 5 or cell block 5 is what they say. It's not an actual hanging room anymore, but it's
Mm.
used as a music room.
Wow.
And a lot of my students that have been in there that use it for music, not all of them, but some of them like say like, oh, I've heard things or seen things in here, like eerie things, right? So there's just eeriness to it. And then there's also, the cell block 5 or tier 5, people have said and reported seeing things that aren't there, like
Yeah.
people holding lanterns,
Mm,
things like that that aren't something that you do nowadays. But back in the day, we know that the Folsom prison, when it was first opened, that's how they saw. Like the correctional officers used lanterns to get down the hall and things like that, to see what was going on. And it's just very intact from what it looked like very early on, right? So like when you go
yeah.
into the tiers, um, they're it's rock. It's the cells are tiny and
Mm,
tinier than the newer prisons that are out there, right? And the more common one I feel like nowadays is like pods, right? Where it's like people are in pod spaces versus like a whole cell. Not
yeah.
that everyone's like that, but like yeah, and so it's just interesting. And then the guys that have, reside there right now, even some COs have said, like, it's kind of eerie over in this cell block. And if you go right
Mm,
beyond the hanging room, is where Johnny Cash performed at the cafeteria, which is AKA the Chow Hall, right? And
mm-hmm.
the whole stair area, or I'm sorry, the stage area is still there. So if you walk past the Chow Hall, you can see the stage that Johnny Cash performed at. And when you walk out of the cell block into the yard, right on the yonder is the chapel that
Mm,
Johnny Cash sings about. It's intact. It looks old and ancient, and there's a lot of like historical stuff there.
yeah.
Hmm.
Do you ever go into New Folsom or is it just Old Folsom?
Only Old Folsom, yeah.
Uh,
I haven't been into New Folsom yet.
I was gonna say, the education over there is gonna be a totally different program.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I will say like levels, right? So I'm not trying
yeah,
to.
yeah,
So level four Mule Creek A Yard is where I've taught before, and the vibe is different than level two's Folsom, Old Folsom.
yeah,
And I've heard like, New Folsom where it is a level four, that is high vibes. Like the energy is like distressed a lot of times and elevated. And
yeah,
so yeah, yeah, definitely can tell the difference when I'm on Mule Creek. It does feel like there's a little more tension, but typically the education um building is like a sacred space. So it's like it seems like people who get to even go in there and get an education have a different respect for that space. And typically they're pretty attentive and they listen and they engage in a way that puts whatever's happening on the yard, they leave it on the yard, right? So,
yeah. There's there's a lot of popularized, I want to say documentaries, I guess, that talk about people on death row. There was one, I can't remember the name of it, but it was on YouTube. I watched it just recently, and it kind of highlighted everybody who was executed in like 2024, 2025, and then everybody upcoming in 2026. And don't get me wrong, it's all other states, and not every state. It's just there's not that many states that are doing it, but the ones that are sort of like in turbo mode. And as far as California is concerned, those guys have been all pretty much shotgunned out to regular prisons. Gavin Newsom got rid of the death chamber or the gas. Well, it wasn't the gas chamber? It was the lethal injection room. Well, not the room itself, but he got rid of the table. And there's a moratorium. And so some of those guys may be in some of the classes that you're teaching. If you're on a level 4 yard, level 3 yard, they may be at Mule Creek, but one of the things I wanted to bring up was, you talk about the vibe or the feeling, and a lot of the guys that I would see giving interviews that were on death row in various states, they seem to be, I'd say for the most part, like the not the most intelligent people on the planet, but just highly intelligent as far as their own space, like how they grew up, what their triggers were. Like there's a lot of self reflection, and they just seem mild mannered, humble, kind, very remorseful, and somebody who like at that point, you kind of, I'm sure the victims and, there's laws and they got to carry out, they're going to carry out, be it in Texas or Florida. Um, but for the most part, I would say guys that you run into that may have committed a heinous offense 20 or 30 years ago, or, who are coming to get an education. And like I said, like you were saying a minute ago, the humble space when you come to get an education, it's like, uh, do I guess people can't journey in there to see what you see, but from your experience, they are respectful. They are kind. It's not some movie a type atmosphere where people are coming in there giving aggressive vibes to you and acting kind of crazy because you're a female. Like for the most part, I mean, obviously you've been working in there for a while. Have you ever had any incidents where you felt threatened or you felt like, oh shoot, this isn't going to work out? Like, or has everything pretty much been even keel?
um, I would say across both yards, 99.9% of the time, I've felt secure. Like it never felt like threatening to me. There's a mutual understanding. And maybe it's because I'm a woman walking the yard or I'm in the education building and I'm providing the education that there's a mutual understanding. I'm not sure. But only the small, like minor percentage that I felt like not even threatened, but more of like I could recognize somebody was in distress and they were upset with me. I wasn't worried that they would hurt me or anything. I was just more of like I recognized this was a these few times that it's happened that it was a mental health thing and that this person was in a distress that like they were trying to still understand and navigate. And so what worked for me was just holding space with them, whatever that meant in that moment. Meaning like, okay, if they thought I misgraded their paper or didn't give them
Mhm.
grace or something like that, then I would try to understand it and also like, I don't know, follow through with like whatever I had to as the teacher, right? But it never felt like a threat, if that makes sense, where I'm like, oh, now they're gonna sock me or something. Like I have not
Yeah.
ever felt threatened. And that's not me like gloating, but literally I've been going in since 2009, really off and on from 2009 to 17, and then from 2017 it stayed more or less consistent that I was frequenting doing this activity or that activity inside mostly like Folsom and Solano. And yeah, and it just kind of I've never really felt any kind of threat in the few times that it's like, ooh, like this person's a little triggered. I was always amongst many people that I knew like probably would not let anything happen, even if they tried, and I never even worried about them like trying or thinking like they're gonna sock me or anything. It was more of like I felt like I have the tools to help keep this de-escalated, and I don't know if that's ignorant of me to say, but like that's how I feel. And um yeah, I feel like that's how it's been, and it's worked out for me. And to kind of piggyback off that though, like what you're saying, Jesse, too, is like there is a bias, right? Like there's this hyper label and this thing that instills fear in people who don't know what it's like to be in prison, whether you're like a staff or somebody who's incarcerated there. But TV and other places create this narrative that it's always scary, it's always dangerous, and if you go in there, it's always a threat. And I feel like that's a narrative that I grew up with,
Hmm.
being that part of my family, like was oriented around like law enforcement and stuff, and had their own narratives from their own lived experience, but also is very one-sided, right? And then there's also just the TV narratives, and then people who also collectively instill fear in the situation, right? Because we all have our perspective, and if it's somebody you respect, then you might take it more seriously. So going to San Quentin the first time, 2009, and I remember being really taken back because my anxiety was a little high that day because I thought these are the narratives I have going in and what I should expect. And when I went in, my anxiety really dissolved pretty quickly because all those narratives dissolved. None of them felt applicable anymore. And I realized I was carrying somebody else's beliefs about this situation or this population of people, right? And I realized that like my narrative now could be very different because what I experienced that day. And it continues to be that, right? Like it's never wavered from it, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, like I say my perspective of how I was raised was the impression I got. I can't speak for anybody else. I came from a family. There was five kids, and I was the only one who got locked up. For any length of time. Besides, I think my brother had like one minor arrest once, which isn't even on his record anymore. Um, and another sister, I think, got a couple DUIs. But other than that, I thought going to prison was like the place to be. It was going to be like going to Stanford or something. And don't get me wrong, drugs and other things influenced a lot of the connections that I had or made, and that like poured more gas on the fire, and like just like a forest fire just takes off you know once you cut off all the people who were like trying to keep you on the right path, you just you know um but that being said, it's the perspective I have now is totally different. It's like it's a fine line for me to say that that's definitely not a place I want to be with, and like without having like disdain for it, just like it's kind of like a floating piece in between the two polar opposites of saying, oh, that's a horrible place and the people in there are this and that, and compared to like, what, I just don't want to make the decisions that are going to lead me there, you
Mhm.
know simply because I know one, somebody's going to have to get victimized, for me to get there. They just don't put you there for no reason. Are there good people in there? Absolutely. People that I learned from, people that educated me, that I could bounce ideas off, that are helpful, that have insight, education. One guy I knew studied kinesiology. We used to be out there doing body weight push-ups, and he would figure out different angles, and we would lean back to back, or one of us get on each other's shoulders and do squats. Like there was ways to quote unquote, build muscle without any weights whatsoever. And I just thought those things were awesome. And there's one guy, I think I've said this dozens of times, but he was, I was talking about conflicts I had with my dad growing up, and he goes, "Sounds like you don't think your dad loved you." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I thought." He goes, "Well, your heavenly Father loves you." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's trying to talk to me about God and telling me that God built this prison just for me to get this education so that I could come out a better man. And that has never left me. You know what I mean? And I stopped looking at prison as this place where, the government built and they want to trap you in there. I really looked at it like a house of correction, and like they call it Department of Corrections, and I was in Preston School of Industry. I was talking to a guy the other day. I wish I could go back and take advantage of all those trades. They had so many cool things back there: masonry, landscaping, small engine. I don't even know how to fix a lawnmower. I know how to push one, but they had small engine repair. But I was too busy fooling around doing other stupid stuff. And there's so many things that one can benefit from the incarceration, and if they take the correction and better themselves. So like like I said, just to make a point, like I don't look back and think, oh man, I'm glad I'm out of there. This place is a zoo and all this other stuff. I really look at it like, especially now with the new California model. That's another question I was going to bring up was, you started in 2009, and then since then, a few different I don't think they call them superintendents. They call them, the director. You know, the directors have changed. So, I mean, some of the directives have changed. And the big thing now everybody keeps talking about is the California model. And I was wondering, like, what have you noticed with the California model compared to some of the directives and the way that you functioned or, interacted with inmates or staff, under different, I guess, narratives, I guess.
Hmm. I don't know if I have like a super great answer for that because I'm still trying to understand the California model and where it exists in the prison. I
Okay.
think it's the strongest like at San Quentin, where it's like they call it San Quentin University for a reason, where it's
Hmm.
like people have so many opportunities. Like you're saying with your youth detention, you saw this and you didn't take advantage of it at the moment. So I feel like the California model might be really strong in San Quentin, where it's like people have all these rehabilitative resources, so much so that they've now changed their name to San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. It's no
Hmm.
longer a state prison, right? Um, but as for other places, I feel like the California model, I
Hasn't
don't
reached there yet.
hasn't quite reached there all the way. And I see it when I hear like the deficits across students, right? So students where I'm telling them, oh, San Quentin has this. And there's kind of like this like awe in their eyes of like, man, I wish we could have that. Like, right. So there's where it's like the California model has a long way to go still, where it's like if we're gonna have this like rehabilitation umbrella, maybe it should cross all prisons, right?
Mm.
Ones that stay open and all that stuff. And yeah, I just feel like it's still in progress, and I know it's like you can't just implement something overnight. It's more like, okay, we're gonna go this route. So it takes a collective experience of like now everybody who's an old OG there, like a staff and people incarcerated alike, have to unlearn things and relearn. So that takes time because there's resistance likely, especially like I've heard, with some staff where it's like older staff are very resistant to changing their mind about how they perceive the people they work with you know um
Yeah.
it's not all of them, but there are some that kind of have this dehumanizing perspective that they're different than the guys or gals incarcerated, right? And so
Yeah.
there's that, and so it's almost like this collective like you have to unlearn and relearn, and it takes a community to like engage in that. And there's just resistance naturally, right? Like there's some staff and even people incarcerated who probably are like, what is going on? Like this doesn't align with what I've done to survive in here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
You
yeah.
know, it was, I kind of, I paroled in 2022, so I kind of missed out on the new thing rolling out. I've heard a lot of stuff, and I know there was a lot of like pushback even then about implementing what was going to come, and some of the OG officers that would, stop by I was in a dorm in San Quentin when I paroled, so there was a couple OG COs that would stop by and be like, "All right, Ayers, last time I'm gonna see you," and I'd be like, "Wow, what's up? Oh, I'm gonna retire, or you're gonna go. I'm gonna go on vacation. For a while. I'm gonna use up all my vacation time. I'll be gone before you get out. So take care of yourself and this and that and some of those guys, I think, along with the OG inmates that have been in there, some of them 30, 40, 50 years. When I was in there, that I got to talk to really." man, they really wanted to pour into you or me, for example, like their wisdom and whatever they could as far as hope. You know what I mean for my life, and I really do appreciate that. And there was other ones. Don't get me wrong, you knew who to stay away from. You know, you can't go to the podium and ask so and so for toilet paper. You know what I mean? You got to wait till another shift when the cool guy's on or whatever. You're like, hey, I got some toilet paper. You know, just simple stuff or the phone. You know, so and so ain't gonna let nobody use the phone that day. And it was unfortunate to have, don't get me wrong, bad people, but when the cool ones were on or whatever, and the TV'd be on loud and the football game going and everybody, it's a different vibe and a different feeling. And you knew like, hey, it's cool. You could go in and out of the building, but dorm living was totally different than cell living. But the point I was making was like even having old school CEOs that you ain't got nothing coming. At least you knew where you stood. It seems like there's a lot of people right now they don't know where they stand. Their equilibrium is off because things are changing so rapidly. And I also understand like what you're saying. Like most of the prisons I was at, or even the youth authorities, were just sort of free for all. It's going to be violent. Everybody's going to get locked down, and you're either going to get cell fed because it's on lockdown, or you're going to be able to walk to the chow hall. The yard might be down, as soon as it opens because of some incident that's going to happen. And then, so fortunately, like when I got to San Quentin, that was the first place I ever was where it was like, hey, yard's open, and then the sucker it's staying open. You know what I mean? You could go and come to the education center, you could go to the media center, you go up to the chapel, and there was no like gate where they would stop you and like check your pass to make sure you were allowed to go. You could just walk by, and just show your ID to the officer, and that to me was insane. So like, I've never been on a real like college campus, but that was the closest thing that I've ever experienced to it. And some of the guys there, were like real lawyers. Like it was crazy. Or like some of the dudes wrote news articles, and some of them, you know what I mean, had the San Quentin TV show. So like to interact with those dudes, I felt like I was in little Hollywood sometimes, and I got to work with guys on scripts, and I got to write articles. Um, I got to perform, comedy in the chapel and out on the yard and set up. Man, we used to set up concerts out there with the whole stage and everything, the amplifiers, all that stuff. And it was like, sometimes you didn't even feel like you were in prison. I mean, besides everybody wearing blue, but you're in the Bay Area, and I don't know, that experience is one of a kind, and it's unfortunate. I wish that everybody, like before they go home, could spend their last 3 or 4 years there to really, like, I guess, acclimate to, you know, stepping out. Shit, when I went to Santa Maria in the halfway house, it was really like I slowed down. I was like in I don't want to, I was going to say, for lack of a better term, I was like in the sticks again. I was like, man, there ain't nothing going on out here. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. I felt like there was more stuff going on in prison than there was in that small little farming town. So, um, anyway, I thought Folsom would have more stuff at this time, but it's too bad that they don't. But I would say, um, for what you're doing, what you can with education. And another thing I was going to say with Royal Wellness, like, is there any of that like going into the prison, like, or is that more out like just for guys when they're coming home?
So we don't do with Roya, we don't do any kind of inside work.
Hmm.
Maybe just yet. Maybe one day there'll be like a bill that passes that says therapists can go inside and provide therapy. That would be rad. But right now we do Green Roundtable stuff. So with Land Together, Roya will go in and present what they offer post-release, and then participants can um, gain like insight and support for that. So, example is I brought Roya into like CCWF and CMF and presented like what we do, and now a few of those guys get to utilize the resources. So I guess okay. Side note to answer this a little more correctly is we do some board prep support, or we do like phone consults with people. So sometimes people will call us when they're about to go to board, and they need support with like knowing like how to help themselves through board. So my office assistant right now, he's formerly incarcerated, went to board multiple times, knows what the ins and outs are of board, and helps some of the guys like coach themselves navigating through. He literally would help people prep for board inside. And now he's doing it over the phone at Roya on the outside and helping as best he can. So like there's some things like that
Yep.
are like in reach just a little bit, but we just barely started doing that because we saw a need for it. Another thing is just helping families prepare for release.
Yeah.
That would just be like, okay, your son's getting out. What do you need as a parent, right? Or what do you need as like a person who has a family? Like, so sometimes it's just getting therapy themselves or preparing for a reunification therapy or something. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so mostly it's on the outside, but we have these little tidbits. We go inside, we present. We might do like a resource fair here and there, either outside or inside. So we do things like that, but we don't
Yeah.
have necessarily an actual like what is the word like a presence inside prisons aside from the fact that there is this offering that guys and gals can utilize when they get out. And they can
Yeah.
write us or call us and ask for a letter for board saying that they have a therapist program lined up,
Yeah.
therapy program lined up post release and stuff like that.
That therapy for families is like the biggest. Everything else you're talking about is amazing. Don't get me wrong. A guy getting some help with board, some feedback, outreach. What do you need? When you're coming home. But the therapy for families, I think, for me anyway, it touched something like because there's so much, I'd say, conflict when you're quote unquote a new person, like when you're really rehabilitated and you're like, functioning on a higher level than you ever had before, and you have goals and you're striving for something. What I didn't expect was that individual or that person who I am today is so foreign to my family that it, I guess, threatens kind of like that California model where people's equilibrium is off. They don't know which way to go. It's like when they're used to seeing me, juvenile hall, jail, youth authority, prison, coming home and just drugs and drinking and taking off, and then they don't see you again for 6 months or 6 years or whatever. um, it's really foreign to them to see somebody who's standing up for themselves, communicating, who's assertive, who's got goals, who's working towards those goals. And then when the not everything works out. I think it was Alexander Graham Bell or Thomas Edison or somebody said, if you fail 10,000 times, and you succeed once, you're still don't consider yourself a failure. That's a success. So it's like, I think some other guy I met one time, he was a pianist, and he said you have to prepare 10,000 hours for a symphony, and that's a lot of preparation and time. So I feel like, so much stuff doesn't look like progress to my family or people who are close to me. But to me, these are like monumentous gains. You know what I mean? Like every day, just kind of like climbing the mountain steady, is the course. And I think, having for guys who have done life, who spent 30, 40 years, to coming home to family members who may not recognize who they are, that therapy for them to help receive them, and someone to go to and say, hey, he's acting like this, or this is confusing. Why is he doing this? You know what I mean? And like, um, just the ability to help merge that, I think, is amazing. And I appreciate that you guys are doing that. For I know the frustration, and if somebody is in not such a good place, I mean, that could cause a lot of like it could cause new trauma. Um an individual could, I don't know, like there's one specific guy, I'll tell you, I won't say his name, but he was a lifer. He did 30 years. He got out. He was married, and him and his wife, they moved together, and he just couldn't deal with the day to day. He thought he was going to take on all these projects and everything was going to be great, and he got really stressed out, and he ended up going back into like a sober living long term program, which I thought about doing over and over again. But I kept thinking that if I did that, I'd be failing. That I need to see this through. I need to get through this. And anyway, for the most part, I say I'm glad I stuck it out. I'm still here with my family, and I'm closer now to having my own place than ever before. So. Um, that brings me to another question. I was going to say, when you see people or individuals, as a therapist or as a teacher or as through the various programs you're a part of, when you start working with somebody on any level, be it homework or parole conditions or just the stresses of being free compared to being incarcerated, and just being overwhelmed, you know. Um, I'm sure you deal with a lot of like tough stuff, like hard issues, childhood trauma, stresses, triggers, things that, are really, really heavy. Um, and at what point, or like, I'd say, be it 6 months from then or 6 years from then, when you hear some good news about somebody who made it, like how rewarding is that for somebody else to look on the outside and think, well, why would you do that work, man? You're always dealing with such tough stuff. You got to go through the gate at prison. You got to deal with these guys to get locked up again. But for the success cases, the people that really make your heart smile when you see them doing well, like how rewarding is that for you to just inspire you to like not inspire you to keep going because you're already on this path, but just that really like warms your heart and says, I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Oh yeah. I guess what I think of is it's like there was a lot of opinions against my work that I do, right? So it's almost like not that I seek validation or reinforcement like that, but it's like to do any kind of work in general, you have to like believe in it. And sometimes I feel like it has to be on a profound level where it's like nothing's going to deter you if it's meant for you to do this work, right?
Yeah.
And the little sprinkles on top are like these moments where people come back and they're being successful or they're doing like what they said they would, or they set these goals out and they're like really doing great. So in the sense that you're asking like how rewarding is it, I would say yeah, it is definitely is rewarding, but it also is something that like I never doubted. I was like,
Mm.
there it is. It just everything arrives in due time. So you know what I mean? And it's also like those people who do are still on the path of like trying but they're struggling or something and they're not quite where they want to be. It's like I definitely don't discount that they won't ever arrive. It's just more of like my mind, I like to tell people and I have to tell myself is we all arrive in due time to where we want to be or what we want to do, like you know what I mean. And I think every day at work is a reminder and a validation that like I'm supposed to be doing what I'm doing because um nobody's opinions that are negative have ever steered me to be like, should I be doing this? Like, never. Not any instilled fear thing that anybody's ever shared with me has been like, this is a lost cause or something. And I've never thought that at
Yeah.
all. Like, it's never
Mm.
been strong enough for me to be swayed ever. And um, I would say those little sprinkles are the things that I'm like, see, like 99 times out of 100 it's works out, right?
Yeah.
Recidivism's still real. People still go back, but it doesn't mean they're a terrible person. It means like they might have more work to do. And maybe sometimes this structure is a space that maybe hopefully helps them do that work. I mean,
Yeah. Knowing what I know from prior conversations, I think you've told me before that you've worked with youth, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And my example is, and people can find statistics if they want to back this up, but in your, you know, I'd say perspective and your, life's work and everything you've seen, how often do you feel like people who are in prison or in juvenile hall or committing crimes or these offenses, um, who aren't traumatized by some kind of childhood situation or some sort of incident or whatever that quote unquote doesn't excuse their behavior, but really does set them on this path of vulnerability and ending up in, hurt people. Like, just for me, it was very rare, and I mean like absolutely rare, where I would come across somebody who like perfect childhood, everything they wanted, never had a problem, school was great, and then boom, they had this thing happen, and you're like, damn, what the hell did you do that for? It's like, to me, it was really rare. But I was just wondering, like, from your perspective, or for people to get an idea, to really see, the human side of individuals who are incarcerated. Like, how often is it you come across somebody who just is straight up, well, I don't want to label it like that, but somebody who hasn't been affected by either generational trauma or alcoholism or some kind of abuse or something.
Well, I know it's a tough one because it's like it's what people are willing to share and what
Yeah.
people see as traumatic and what people, determine is like a situation that changes the trajectory of their life or something, right?
Hmm.
But like to kind of go off of what you're saying, like it is really rare. Very rarely, and I don't even have to ask, I don't have to prior anything. And I'm
Yeah.
not assuming, but eventually, especially like in my psychology class, things surface where it's like
Mm.
as people learn more about themselves, they're like, holy crap, I have trauma, or oh my gosh, like that was more traumatic to me than I thought, because now I'm learning about the nervous system and how every time I'm around somebody who reminds me of this person who abused me, I get triggered and I don't know why. And that's, like it's stuff like that where it's like very rarely is somebody like, have never had trauma as a kid and I ended up in prison. Um, it's really rare. And I feel like I don't know enough about everybody to know if it's 100% valid that there are people out there who haven't had a trauma that like impacted their, direction and they ended up in prison. I imagine there is, but it's also like it's really rare. I've met a few people who said nothing has ever happened to them. Um,
Yeah.
and I never pried, so I don't know, but it's rare.
Yeah, I specifically remember this one guy. It was my first time in the county jail. I was 18 years old. I was on the youth authority parole because they gave me a sentence from 15 to 25. Back then was the youth. It wasn't like youth life, but it was the jurisdiction of the parole. They could violate you for your offense and everything. And so I was 18. I was in the county, and they put me in what they called like the sophisticated pod or whatever. It's like it was all everything was segregated, so it was all white dudes, and they were all prisoners, like on their way back to prison. We all wore red jumpsuits. And then one of the guys was asking me, he's like, "Man, you been to the pen?" I said, "No, I was in the youth authority." He goes, "What the hell?" And he starts talking to me, and how old are you? And da da da. And I said, "I'm 18, blah blah." And he goes like, "How long did I said, well, I just did 2 years, and a little over 2 years, and I just I was only out 3 months, and I was going back, and I remember him looking at me, going, "Shit, kid, I didn't start getting in trouble till I was 34." And I looked at him. He goes, "I was married, I had 2 kids, and that's when I started partying." And he goes down his list of drugs he was doing, and it started at bars, and then it led him into his criminal lifestyle, as he explained. And just as astonished as he was looking at me, thinking that I was too young to be doing all this, I was astonished, thinking, why would you be going out drinking and doing stuff when you have a wife and a family? Like, it just didn't make any sense. But he was definitely the first person I met that like never there was nothing, you know what I mean? He didn't have like any ghosts from his past or people he hated. He just started partying, and that led to excessive partying, which he may have been alcoholic, genetically or spiritually, however alcoholism affects everybody. um, and he definitely had an addiction issue, but he was like a golden boy, you know what I mean? He didn't cry at any sad songs or nothing. He was happy go lucky, and he really loved life, like, and incarceration was just part of it to him. So anyway, uh, aside from him, it's very, I mean, extremely rare for me to come across people, and I think when people have the support, like I've seen, when you have the support, you have the education, you have the rehabilitation, it can transform anybody. One of the best things I ever heard, this guy, I forgot his name. Um, he was from one of the local news channels in the Bay Area. He came into the chapel one day in San Quentin, and he held up a can, and then the recycling value was like 5 or 10 cents or something. And he goes, "If this can has a redemptive value, so much more so do you." And everybody was silent. You know what I mean? And when you talk about like grown men who don't believe they have any value or worth because they did whatever they did to their victim, and they can't bring that person back, or they can't change the situation that just wrecked themselves and the other person's lives, and or multiple people's lives or communities. Some of these guys like did a lot of stuff, when they were younger, and man, it just really inspired, I think, everybody in that room to dive into themselves and really like focus on your strengths and develop goals, because how hard is that, when you don't think you're worth anything, you don't think anything is worthwhile. So it's a huge I don't know, for people who who don't think that prison has anything to offer, and that rehabilitation is a waste, and that people are pieces of trash. I hope they get to meet somebody like yourself, or somebody like me, or get to watch this at least, or other stories like this, to really be at least change their perspective or give them another perspective. Because there's magic, I call it magic happening every day, but it's literally magic, man. To me, anyway. I know for you, like, you have this confidence, and that's great. Like, hey, I knew it all along. Um, but for me, like, I have so much doubt. Like, do they want to try? I
Mhm.
think that's it. Like, the miracle's there, the magic can happen. but does that person want that miracle to happen? You know what I mean? Like,
Oh yeah.
it's the craziest thing. You gotta want it. Like, and it could just, it could be an imagination type thing. Like, well, I could do this, and all you need, they say faith of a mustard seed. It's this teeniest, tiniest little spark in the world that starts a fire. And anyway, I just hope they want it. And because once you do, it's like a whole nother path of life. And the simplest things are so gratifying. Um, compared to back then where everything was so grandiose, for at least for me anyway. I had a like a, I don't know what you call it, a super uh unrealistic way of thinking about things. um but for I'd say for the most part, for the work you're doing with Roya compared to Land Together, what would you say like overlaps, and what would you say is unique or different about Roya, that people can get there that they can't get anywhere else?
Well, I think the difference here is, yeah, Roya is kind of leaning into reentry world now too, but the foundation is therapy. And with Land Together, it's more like reentry, and then it's now turning into more therapeutic things too, right?
Hmm.
So it's almost like at Land Together we offer coaching, and then we offer reentry services, which can be very, very therapeutic, just as much as going to therapy. So, but I think with Roya, something that's really up and coming recently, like in the last 20 years, is mental health, right? Like in embracing that we all have things going on and that therapy is cool, right?
Yeah.
And now here providing therapy to somebody who maybe has this hyper criminalized label on them, that like those kinds of people don't go to therapy stereotypically, right? But it's also like here it's offered to you and it's actually going to be really beneficial. And Roya, we see anybody, but we're also very focused on reentry. And something that's unique, I think, about Roya is that I don't think there's any other like private practice in Sacramento area, at least, or maybe I don't know where in California, maybe anywhere, I don't know, that focuses their specialty on like doing trauma-informed care for people post-incarceration, right?
Mhm.
So much so that we write letters like in confidence that we can help these people confidently deal with their reintegration and stuff because the people behind Roya are equipped to do so, right? They've got either the lived experience or they have the like therapeutic awareness, like myself, that I've done a lot of work in reentry before I started diving into therapy with reentry, right? And then
Yep.
I was able to kind of roll it over. And then Land Together, it's like the gardening aspect, right? Like we definitely don't garden at Roya, but like that is also very therapeutic, and it creates tools for people to access different coping tools that maybe they never knew they had because whatever they grew up in maybe didn't give them access to this, or maybe it brings them back to their favorite coping tool because, maybe they did do it a lot, right? Like, so it's just like something that's unique that's happening in prisons.
Yeah.
And then the reentry component was built out of love, right? Because it's like they saw a need, and program managers were doing gate pickups or helping participants post-release with the little bits that they had, and then reentry was born because the need was there. And now it's just taken off and it's becoming maybe even the bigger side of Land Together, right? Where reentry is expanding pretty quickly, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that quality, like you were talking about earlier, saying, justice influenced perspective. Like when you're growing up, it was like, for me, it was like, you know, for you to start going into prisons on and doing the work you're doing, it was the first. I think you were saying in your family, like for me to actually get therapy, it seems like I'm the first in my family to really venture into that, which seems strange and weird and threatening to everybody else, but it's so empowering and it's working for me. It's like I'd never go back to doing a line to feel good or drink a beer to feel good or smoke anything, it took me a long time to get sober. But for those who don't know, and like, I'm sure you can attest to this, is like, however many layers of the onion it takes to get to that core. I firmly believe that the core of all people is good. You know what I mean? We were born good. And that's one of the things I learned in the program in the gardening is like that seed, like there's no, you know what I mean? Like once you there's so much to planting and soil. Dude, like that opens up the eyes of like the hardest dudes that don't even communicate in the gardening circle. We're all standing there at some raised garden bed in the back of H unit in San Quentin. And dudes you never talk to, all of a sudden they're standing next to you while you're meditating. And you're standing there with your hands in some dirt, planting some seeds. And then you like 6 months later, you're potentially eating some strawberries or some spinach or some kale, and you're like chewing on dirt with this dude that you never would have said hi to before for whatever reason. You just didn't know each other. Like that type of stuff is so like transformational in a way, like where you can't see that on paper, you know what I mean, or through some correspondence, which I totally give all the credit in the world to Inside Garden slash Land Together. But for myself, like in the therapy side, what people talk about the onion, like there's so many layers, and you get to that core, and I really believe it's good because we all started out good, and we can all get back there. And for me, it's like how much time, how much therapy, how much effort, and it all begins with wanting to do it. So, like, I want people, I think, to know that no matter what people have done, if they're on death row or not, like everybody's redeemable. Everybody has an opportunity to better themselves. And for those who don't, I mean, they're just choosing not to. And I watched that documentary, like I said, and out of all those dudes on death row, I think there must have been, I don't know how many that were executed in the last few years. Maybe it was like 75. Like I only saw like one or two dudes that like to where even at the end they said they didn't do it or didn't show any remorse. Most people like really apologized and wrote letters to their victims, and it sounded just like the guys that I would meet in groups at San Quentin. Like expressing remorse and showing insight and talking about causative factors and childhood trauma. And I just saw this pattern. Like I can't deny it. Like I just see it. So for other people, I think that talk about trauma and they go, oh well, I never went and did this or I never went and did that. I usually find out later that they got some kind of therapy or some kind of help or some kind of support at a very early age, very near the trauma when it happened. And I realized it just clicked. I was like, once it's addressed, you know what I mean? It's no longer the ghost in the room. It's no longer this haunting figure in your nightmares that drives you to do these things. It's like it's an evaporation. You know what I mean? It's gone. Like so, just speaking it out into existence is what I kills it for lack of a better word. Um, so anyway, like I said, I could praise you all day for the work you do and commend you for what you're doing, but you're so chill about it. It's just it's just so normal to you. Um, I just appreciate you for doing what you're doing, and thank you very much. And for on behalf of everybody who you get to see the progress at the end of the tunnel, or maybe you don't. Maybe they parole from some other prison, and maybe they'll get back in contact with you and say thank you one day, or if not, I mean that may I know for a fact they'll pay it forward because you have one of those energies, one of those spirits that's infusing, and you know what I mean. Once you start communicating and you can hear it's like a spiritual thing that you tune into, and it's peaceful and it's calm and it's grounded and it's nurturing and it's informational. So I don't know you to ever waste words. So anyway, I really appreciate you coming on here. I've been wanting to have you as a guest for a while, and I know you work so much and you're so busy every day. Thanks for the time, and I appreciate it. I don't know. I wanted to ask you another question. Is there any moments? I'm sure there's a lot, but is there any moments that come to mind if somebody asks you about your experience working there? Like, what makes you smile when you go in there? Or what's the story like you remember where you really laughed? Something that made you laugh, like in your stomach. You know what I mean? Like a deep laughter, like incident, maybe something somebody said or some interaction, or maybe you got in the car on the way home and were like, "Oh man, that was like a little cherry on top of the day."
Hmm. I think like every day I go into class because like my students like come out, right? Like I feel like every day we're laughing in class, and I don't know if it's like me. Sometimes I feel like I'm a stand-up comedian in there because I'm trying to make it fun. But I'm
Yeah.
also like the students engage really well, like in both my social work and my psychology class. And I just feel like, like it makes me in awe of all of them because it's like they feel, I imagine, hopefully, they feel safe, like that they can be themselves and that I'm not going to say something that redirects how they're presenting authentically right now in this moment. And so I feel like we're always laughing about this, that, or the other. Does it feel like a high school class sometimes? Yes, like I'm dealing with teenage boys sometimes, and I'm also very like embracive of it, where I'm just like, yeah, like return there and get this corrective experience of like somebody not telling you like a lot of kids deal with hyper labeling in middle school and high school, and so you get this opportunity to just laugh and be silly in class, but also get your work done and all that stuff, and just laugh a little about what you're learning, and also embrace, learn about it and retain it and use it effectively, hopefully in the future. Let it help you develop a little more, So I think it's just like
Yeah.
I always like leave prison smiling, which is weird, but it's like, like I just really love like the work that I do, and I think something else that is an aha or like oh moment is just that like I'm doing what I want to do, right? Like it's this idea of like um when we think of like passion, right? Or purpose. So it's like you want to think of like that Venn diagram. If you know what a Venn diagram is, it's like
Oh yeah, yeah.
so it's like a four-way Venn diagram visual I want to give you, where it's just like in the center is your purpose, but what makes that Venn diagram overlap is it's something you love to do, you're good at it, maybe you get paid for it, which is a bonus. The world needs it. And it encompasses like your passion, your mission. It's your vocational that you're doing that you have to commit to get paid, right? And it is your profession, right? So with all that combined with like that diagram thing, this the very center is like your purpose. So if you can hit all those marks, chances are you're like doing what is purposeful to you. And I feel like when I leave the prison, especially, I have those little moments where everything's settling down because the class is over, that I'm like, oh, like I am doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
They say, it's I don't know who coined the phrase, but they say if you can do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And I think that sort of encompasses what you're saying. If you can hit that trifecta of all of the above, it's going to have that. I always say like a ohm, like a tuning fork, like a spiritual ohm. It's like a really centering, purposeful, like glow. You definitely, yeah, you got that.
That glow,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But I think somebody who's really inspirational to me, and I feel like is somebody that helped, it does take more than, sometimes it takes more than just us to be confident in what we're doing. So I would love to say, I think you said it earlier where I was like, just so like, ooh, I know what I'm doing and I'm confident. And I'd like to think that I was for the most part, but then there was also like situations where I was like, what am I doing? Like, why do I even belong here? Like, am I just being nosy about this population, or am I like really need to be here for some reason, right? So it's synchronicity, but it's also like the mentors that you attach to do whatever work you do. So Father Greg is one
Ah,
of them from Homeboy Industries. Like, I
yeah.
just really admire him. And I think that he has this perspective of he's not trying to save anybody, but he's trying to return people to themselves, right? Like,
Yeah.
to see the value in themselves and to appreciate themselves for who they are in every moment that they are, right? So it's like
Yeah.
we arrive in due time again, right? That whole idea. And he says this, and it's like one of my favorite quotes of him. But he says, like, only the person who ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing it. And
Yeah.
that's it. It's really like profound and it's very true, I think. And I think it's just one of those things that like speaks to his profound like efforts in this work too, that he was confident and didn't care what people thought,
Yeah.
and when something didn't work he shifted gears until it started working, and now he has this huge enterprise.
Yeah. Um, and to attest to that, I find myself so many times, being sober and then therapy and years later, and like I find myself feeling like like myself, like all those layers or callousness that developed to protect, the inner me that wasn't me. It was just this shell of an idea or an image that I thought I needed to protect my younger self or my inner self or the inner child or whatever. Um, like I find myself being that person now and still sometimes second guessing, like, well, do I need to have a little shell? No. Okay. No, no. Okay. No, you're good. And then realizing like the person I am today, I could have been my entire life. And then I'll see all the mistakes I made and I'll totally realize I didn't have to make any of those mistakes at all. I was totally fine the way I was and the way I am. And then without having to like dig up all the years. And don't get me wrong, there's moments where I'll sit there and I'll think, You know what I mean? Like that song "Holding Back the Years" or "Holding Back the Tears" or something. Oh my God, I'll think, oh shit. I'll think about college and sports and just all the connections and people I could have met in a whole nother walk of life, like the butterfly effect. And then I'll have to like zone it back down and just pray
Yeah.
for peace and patience of who I am and just walk it out because this is who I am. And but I appreciate him saying that and you saying that now about just getting us back to who we are because I'm humbled by that and it's astounding and it's a lot. There's certain moments where it is overwhelming where I think, what am I doing here? I don't deserve this. And one of the things I told the lifer group, I used to go to a lifer group, even though I wasn't a lifer, and they knew I wasn't, and I just used to soak up the stuff they were talking about. And before I went home, so I could see the look on some of their faces. Like some of them are like biting their teeth, and I didn't want to talk about it, but one of the guys mentioned it, said I was going home and he wanted me to say goodbye. And I said, look guys, it's not like I deserve my freedom. I said I didn't do anything different than any of you guys. You know what I mean? Like I didn't do anything better, and I'm not any better. I was like, and I'm not going to walk out of here feeling like I accomplished something. I'm just going to appreciate it. And for some reason, when I said I'm just going to appreciate it, some of them who like weren't looking at me for whatever reason turned and kind of like nodded, and I knew that for whatever reason that word came out, that's all you can do. And I don't know if all those guys are going to come home or not. Some of them have been. I've seen them. I've seen them online on Facebook and Instagram, and it's awesome. And for me, that appreciation I got from one of the volunteers, I'm going to forget her name, but she was in a really cool class. She used to teach us. Her little quote was, "Gratitude is the cure. Gratitude is the antidote for an attitude." And sometimes it's really hard to be grateful for the overwhelming circumstances we're in or the obstacles, but if I slow down and I just hold space for the second and take a deep breath, I can be grateful, you know what I mean,
Mm.
for anything. There's an abundance of things to be grateful for, and sometimes it's the simplest things, and for me most of the time it's the simplest things. Um and I'm happy and grateful with that. But I've never. Would you call him? His name's Greg, Father Greg. I think they call him in
Yeah,
Homeboy
Father
Industries.
Greg Boyle.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard of him. I've corresponded with him before. I've heard about his programs, but like not being from LA, I've never taken part in them. But I know he really started seeing the human side of who people did not consider to be human beings, which was violent gang members. And he really saw something, the human side of them, and then his work has been transformative. I know there's many, many people who have been helped along the way, and just being a light. You know what I mean? They say don't take a light and put it under the bed. You got to put the lamp on top of the the table for everybody to see. And there's many shining, beaming lights coming out of Homeboy Industries that are doing awesome work and just really transformed souls. And I'm really appreciative of the work that they're doing because, like, as far as Instagram and Facebook, there's some great people coming out of there and doing a lot of wonderful things.
Yeah, it's freaking awesome.
Yeah, but I'm sure you're hungry by now. You
Yeah.
ready to eat or what?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
I'll go eat soon.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you, and to our audience, any closing words or any words of wisdom you want to partake with, or what?
Hmm. I don't know. I just feel like something we were talking about in class today that, feels like it's been on repeat is like the willingness to humble yourself is important if you want to have any kind of growth, right? So not that it's black and white like the way I just phrased it, but it's more of like being willing to like dismantle your bias if you have one can provide and create a lot of growth in your own self-awareness, right? So example is like there was like conditioned bias in my upbringing for the stuff I've gone like experienced or like the family belief systems around what it means to be incarcerated. And I allowed myself to be humble and lean in and be curious, and it really did a number for me, a good number, right? And so it's kind of like I think it's really important that people stay curious. It doesn't mean you have to do this work, but it's more of like practicing open-mindedness around that. Like if you think you're able to grow, then like other people deserve that chance,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. I was watching this show the other day, and it was like some female guard in some jail and somewhere, I won't say where, I mentioned their names to, but she had done she started working in a jail, and her family was law enforcement, and she started interacting with this inmate and doing all kinds of stuff that she wasn't supposed to do, and she ends up getting a long prison sentence. And I think people are afraid of interacting with inmates, thinking like, oh, they're going to try to manipulate me, they're going to try to um, whatever, use me or whatever, you know what I mean. So like for anybody who is wanting to volunteer or go in, Gogi is a group called Getting Out by Going In, and I always think about getting out by going in. I was like, and I would see guys who were formerly incarcerated going back in, like Jamala for one, Arnold for another, and how like awesome it is for them to give back.
Yeah.
But from your perspective, like, what would you say to somebody who wants to volunteer that may be hesitant about it, or they just need some words of encouragement, or what kind of advice would you give somebody who's wanted to go down that road?
Well, like, I mean, do your work, either go in with somebody you trust or ask a lot of questions before you go in. Um, Stay curious. I mean, I think, it just takes, trusting that like you're gonna, I know you can't guarantee safety, but it's like really like that's why you do informational interviews with people who go in, right? To gauge like the severity of how dangerous is it really and things like that. But also like make sure you do something that you want to do that you can actually engage in if you're gonna go in. I'm actually gonna have somebody who's never been in a prison before come in with me on May 5th.
Okay.
And I'm really curious to see how they navigate it, right? And every semester I bring somebody in who's never been in a prison and we recap. We're like, hey, like how was that for you? And it typically, I mean, every time actually it's been like, whoa, like I didn't expect it to be like that.
Yeah.
Like I just the vision I had versus what it was. And it goes back to my own experience too, where it's like not until I went in was I able to dismantle what's been shaped for me. So I just
Yeah.
encourage people to go in if that's a way that would help dismantle their bias or confirm it, right? Like, I mean, don't knock something you haven't tried, right? I guess.
No, yeah, and like San Quentin, for example, was the first place I was ever at where I saw Lieutenant Robinson coming down to the lower yard with 50 people behind him. Lawyers, students from Berkeley, law students, and I couldn't believe the amount of volunteers that came in. And as happy as we were to see them, so many times they would be so excited to see us, and we would thank them, and they go, no, 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 thank you. So it goes both ways. Anyway, I was gonna say, I know you got to eat. I know you're hungry. You had a long day. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Bahara. And Echoes of Society is very appreciative of your time and everything you do. And to our audience members, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye. Um, how do you have to stop the recording?
See, bam. All right. So I think right when you said thanks, bye. I think right then I'll be like, boop. Um, do you have? There's like a link or something for Roya Wellness or something, right? I could. Is
Is
it
it
on your
still
Instagram?
is it still recording, Jesse? Yeah,
No,
it's
I think.
Roya, ROYA wellness.org. You
Oh
can
shit! Hold on. Stop recording. Oh, stop recording. Bam.